Brother, this is issue that I have with Allah. The most important topics such as the Injeel has no historical evidence that it existed. Alright, so before I continue on reading this comment by Curtis Hardin 38071, obviously the highlight that he raises is related to his belief, which is Christianity, right? Because the most important topics such as Injeel, because how would that be the most important topics, especially when it comes to Islam, when it comes to the Quran, right? As if the Quran centered so much about the Injeel when it is not. Anyway, so we'll read through and then we'll read my response and then his response to it, etc. Right? So let's go. When I first was learning about Islam and heard the claim that the Injeel we have today is not the same as the one that Allah confirmed in the Quran, logically I was looking for the original that Allah said existed. Personally, I'm not sure why that is logical. Personally, I'm not sure. Because Allah mentioned that Adam was existed as the first human being. Do you actually logically looking for traces of existence of Adam? You know, so Allah said about Noah, about the flood. Do you then logically go and seek for it, etc., right? If you are wired in that way, obviously you will be searching for every single thing that is ever mentioned, and I'm not sure. But if he is like that, so obviously he should have more question than the Injeel, because he will ask what is the evidence, historical evidence about Adam, about Noah, etc. Anyway, they all said it doesn't exist. Okay, sorry. But after looking and learning from Muslims, they all said it doesn't exist. I assume those Muslims say it's no longer existent. I'm assuming. I have a really hard time how not one person, even Jesus' closest disciples, didn't talk about this Injeel. Okay, this statement is based on certain resources, as I would assume. Otherwise, how would you know what the closest disciples of Jesus said? And if whatever record about those disciples is based on certain religion, obviously there's a possibility that it's already skewed. Anyway, even if it wasn't a book, just a revelation to Jesus, no one talked about it or documented it when Jesus died. That's like if we go back to 9/11 when the plane crashed into the buildings and many people saw it and shared their story, only to find out 600 years later that Allah said it didn't happen and appeared so. So I assume this is related to the crucifixion of Jesus, because suddenly he goes there and suddenly he mentioned about this, and this is normally related to what Allah said about what people believe they observe about Jesus being crucified. Why would people just make up a conspiracy right after it happened? Question mark. There's so much evidence that it did happen, and today it would have been 24 years ago. Alright, so that's the comment. So let's go straight to my response to it. Thank you for commenting and sharing your perspective. You stated that this is issue that I have with Allah. Right? I quoted his statement. Just to put it out there that Allah is an Arabic word referring to the one true God, which is why the Arabic Bible use Allah as well in the Bible, beginning with Genesis 1. So I have a video previously where I showed that in the Arabic text of the Bible, you see Allah, Allah, Allah in the Genesis 1 because God, God, God is mentioned there, right? You stated the most important topic, such as the Injeel, has no historical evidence that it existed. Again, the quotation. So it seems that you seek historical evidence to believe in something. That would mean you would reject the idea of Adam and Eve, you would reject Abraham, you would reject any notion of heaven and hell, you would reject the idea of Satan, etc. Correct? Question mark. Because all of this, if you seek historical evidence, you wouldn't find it as well, right? Given that all those are not supported by historical evidence. So there I just want to see whether he is being consistent or he's only looking into this particular topic, but the rest doesn't care that much. You stated logically I was looking for the original that Allah said existed. I wonder, when you read the Bible or Quran about Adam, do you apply the same principle? Question mark. Do you go to historical evidence to see if Adam actually existed based on historical evidence? Question mark. You stated they all said it doesn't exist. I assume you mean it no longer exists, correct? Meaning it once existed but no longer in existence today. That is just like Adam, Abraham, other revelations prior to Taurat. Those were once in existence but have passed away or lost, etc. You stated, I have a really hard time how not one person, even Jesus' closest disciples, didn't talk about this Injeel. I assume you based that statement on what you obtained from the Gospels? Question mark. Given that you didn't interact with any of Jesus' disciples. For me, given that God himself tells us about it in the Quran, that is sufficient for me because God is the best witness compared to any human being. Now this for me is fundamental question, but for whatever reason, and we'll see later on, Christians do not seem to think what God tells us as conclusive, as true, necessary to, as proven, etc. They would still seek other proof, even if something is from God. That is interesting to me. You made a comparison with 9/11 as an analogy for comparison. I think a better comparison is the event where the sea split and Moses goes across. If we do not know anyone that told us the story and we find no historical record whatsoever, but thousands years after, Allah told about that incident as a fact. So yeah, because originally he kept telling about the Injeel, the Injeel given to Jesus, and no one seems to talk about it, right? So I'd say the more suitable analogy is, for example, this, because we read that Allah Subhanahu wa Taala, for example, said that, you know, the sea split, right, etc. And if there's no one telling us about that outside of this source that we have here, then that's more related to the case that we are talking about here, right? Why would you deny it because you have never come across anyone saying they witnessed it? Okay, so he then replied back, hello and thanks for your prompt reply. I agree with you on the surface level. Christians in Arabic also use the word Allah because that's simply the Arabic word for God. However, it's crucial you start to look how you use Allah and Christians who use it. For example, the difference is not in the name, but the nature of the one being described. Christians who say word Allah in Arabic still mean one triune God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Think of two people using the same word doctor. One is talking about a brain surgeon, the other about a dentist. I'm not sure whether that example works. Anyway, same word, very different realities. Because in this case, both are in existence, but separate entities, right? Now, but when we talk about Allah according to Christian and Islam, it's not really about there's this one God, that is Christian God, there's one God, there's Islamic God, right? Then you actually are thinking there are multiple gods. Anyway, I would encourage you to look at Afshin Javid's story. I'm not sure who that is. He called on Allah when being attacked by the spirit of death. What is that? And nothing happened until he yelled God in his mother tongue, and the one triune God told him, say the name of Jesus, and then the spirit went away. Interesting. I'm interested to know what is the spirit of death. Is it the angel of death, or what else? Is there any demon or something according to Christian? Second topic regarding evidence. Let me be clear on my stance, on my approach, because your assumption isn't accurate. In every religion, you need to have articles of faith in certain topic. We both know this. Know if a doctrine has a story that you can back up with non-biased evidence, then it strengthens your case and, in my opinion, makes your belief more grounded. You as a Muslim have to ignore evidence regarding certain topics, and this isn't logical to me. So suddenly he accused me as a Muslim to ignore evidence. If I hired you to be a detective to find out if Jesus died and rose again, and if your original Injeel existed when your Allah confirmed it, your Islamic faith would blind you the historical evidence. In fact, if we took your claim to a courtroom setting, Jesus never died on the cross and Allah saved him, and we don't have the original Injeel. The only evidence you have is your Quran. For Momi, okay, I'm this typo here, I think. I don't need to use my Bible. I just use historical sources that are available to prove against your claim. The 9/11 analogy was an impactful event, just like Jesus' death and resurrection in 33 AD. The analogy gave you a completely different category that sidestepped the core issue. Why no one mentions or preserves the supposed Islamic revelation? I question historical documentation of your Islamic Injeel revelation, but you answer with faith in a miracle story. So I think he shifted, because his comment, he shifted topic, right, from originally about the Injeel and then suddenly about Jesus' death. So the analogy he brought is about Jesus' death without mentioning that first. So when I first originally replied, I didn't make that connection, so that's why I don't think what is this analogy about. So I was replying with the analogy as we mentioned there about Moses and the sea is about something that have no historical record, but God says it, right? So I think we have a misunderstanding in our communication here. Anyway, if Jesus had your original Injeel revelation and he was effectively sharing this revelation, how come when he died in 33 AD, no one continued to share his Islamic message? Instead, disciples begin preaching his resurrection within days. So all of this is based on certain thing that he referred to, right? And then I think if we want to go down that road of evaluating historical document, then we will have to see that how authentic, etc., etc. Right? But I'm not even going there, because I'm just sticking to the principles. But I think there's a mismatch here because, and we'll see whether we address it later. In fact, between 33 to 35 AD, the earliest creed was established, and then suddenly he quote 1 Corinthians. So I'm not sure whether he is referring to external sources or is everything here is based on the Bible. Because if everything here is based on the Bible, then is that even a valid discussion? Right? Because he says that it's a problematic that I'm referring to the Quran as a primary source. But then if he is actually just referring to the Bible, then what's going on here? Anyway, what is your logic as to why no one heard or documented your Isa's Injeel, but they documented Jesus' death and resurrection and his divinity almost immediately after he died and rose again? Okay, I'm not sure whether anyone documented Jesus' divinity, because isn't that a conclusion? Or did I, meaning how did they observe divinity? Anyway, so this is my reply. Okay, first it's about the God and Allah, right? I am aware what Muslim believe about Allah slash God and what Christian believe about Allah slash God is fundamentally different. I wasn't arguing the belief and concept of God, about Allah and God is the same. I was simply stating the fact about that word given you used that word. Alright, so hopefully that's clear. You stated you as a Muslim have to ignore evidence regarding certain topics, and this isn't logical to me. Personally, as a Muslim, I have never yet encountered such a thing. So I'm intrigued at what exactly you see as such within Islam. You stated our Islamic faith would blind you the historical evidence. I don't see it that way. I evaluate historical evidence based on its merit. I do understand generally in uncovering history, we go with the best conclusion possible because we have to live with the fact that we are limited to the information that we have. Historical misunderstanding have changed over time with new discoveries that adds to the data pool. And we generally do not have any fundamental issues with holding on to the best understanding of what happened, despite the level of certainty that is exactly happened as such cannot possibly be ascertained. Right? Because it is simply history. That's how I accept history, any history about my country, about the world event, etc. But when it comes to my salvation, about understanding God, that is why most history does not meet the criteria needed, unless it goes to the level of scrutiny, for instance, like the hadith being put under. For any hadith to be considered sahih, the authenticity is evaluated to a certain level before the level of confidence is established. If you are familiar with the science of hadith, the level of scrutiny, you would understand that none of the biblical verse can ever meet the sahih standard. I wonder whether Christians understand this point though, right? The best possible is perhaps da'if or da'if jiddan. I think that's the best ever that any verses from the Bible can ever be, even if, right? But most, I don't think even reach da'if jiddan, which we don't accept to become the basis of fundamental beliefs. So if we have hadith, this is for Muslim, right? If we have hadith that is da'if, let alone da'if jiddan, that wouldn't become our reference or our basis to believe in something, right? So we have that discipline, but obviously Christians do not have, because otherwise they do not have anything. A Christian have told me this was when I was not familiar yet with the Bible and assumed it was like the Quran, that it was totally unfair for me to evaluate the Bible to the same benchmark as the Quran or the Hadith, because the Bible do not even claim to be such or similar thing. He clarified that the Bible is historical document, so it is more in the level of sirah, or in between hadith and sirah. Right? When he clarified that to me, only then I understood that my demand onto the Bible to meet the same criteria of the Quran or the hadith was so unfair, because the Bible do not even claim to be similar to the Quran or hadith to begin with. Now, going back to your analogy, in the court, when we have God himself that is out of the time and space and know everything, testifying to the same thing or to something, that would be the best of witness ever possible to me, especially compared to historical accounts that it is da'if at best in terms of its authenticity level. Of course, it is unfair to use hadith authenticity level on history, but for me, to base my salvation upon such level of authenticity is required. I do not force such a thing onto others, of course. Now, when you say, but you answered with faith in a miracle story, I assumed you think that we end up believing in the Quran simply by faith, not based on proof and evidence. Okay, so I think here I misunderstood what he's saying, in the sense that he shifted topic with the analogy of 9/11, and I thought he was still about Injeel. And then when you comment, we already going separate way, it seems. Now when I read it back, I see it, that he's talking about the death of Jesus. I'm still assuming he talked about Injeel, because the fundamental part of his comment initially is about the Injeel, and then suddenly he goes to resurrection, whatever, without even mentioning Jesus' death as resurrection, but suddenly using that 9/11 proof analogy, right? Perhaps this is where we differ. I do not accept the Quran as the word of God by faith. I follow the proof and evidence. When you ask, how come when he died in 33 AD, no one continued to share his Islamic message? Question mark. Do you ask based on fact? In which case, I'm interested to know, how did you know that fact? Or do you ask based on available information from the Bible, for instance, which is the report that survived until now? Because how I accept it, it would be very different, right? When he asks a question and use a certain premise, that premise itself is not yet proven. On the subject of historical evidence, do you believe in Abraham? And outside of Abrahamic religion's resources, is there any historical or archaeological evidence on the person of Abraham? Would you still believe Abraham as told in the Bible, or would you reject it due to lack of archaeological evidence? Just wondering considering you brought up belief based on faith. Now, when you discuss Jesus' death and resurrection, do you want to discuss it as historical events? Question mark. Or would that become a basis of our belief system, hence directly influencing our salvation? Question mark. As historical events, I have very little interest on whether or not people report that they see anyone died, they saw someone resurrected, etc. Any such discussion with regard to any particular human being throughout human history would simply end up as what we accept as history of the event in the past. But if you bring that incident within the context of becoming a basis of our salvation and belief system about God, number one, the best level of confidence possible based on what was reported in the Bible is not sufficient for me to gamble my salvation on. Number two, even if Jesus dies on the cross, does not in any way justify the belief in Christianity. I understand if that didn't happen, then the whole belief of Christianity falls apart. But even if it did happen, it does not support the whole belief of Christianity. A human being died on the cross, a prophet of God died on the cross. Such thing does not support the core belief of Christianity. That's my point of view. Now next, suddenly I replied back, can you cite or quote my statement that lead you to say that I claim the Bible was corrupted? So I'm not sure whether he deleted that comment or that comment went missing. But this is shifted, I think, based on the time, as well as this shifted to something else. We'll continue with the rest in the next video. Thank you for watching. See you next time.